Welcome back, everybody, to linuxacademy.com. My name is Terry, and in today's course, we continue our preparation for the Linux Foundation Certified System Administration exam. Today, we're going to be working in our email section. Specifically, what we're going to start out with is we're going to talk about email in general, and we're going to be working with SMTP, IMAP, and IMAP-S. We're going to be restricting access to an SMTP server, testing it, etc. But the first thing that we want to do is we want to start out with adding email aliases. So on most Linux installations, and although we'll be working with CentOS 7 in this video, the process is the same regardless of whether it's systemd or sysvnet, or whether it's Ubuntu or Debian based or Red Hat or CentOS based. The directories are in the same location, the configurations are the same. The service control mechanism, whether it's systemctl to restart our services for the SMTP service called postfix, or whether we're using the service command in a sysvinit system, are the only differences. So having said that, now we're going to look at how do we add email aliases. So we're going to be talking about local email by and large, although the configuration applies to the larger spectrum of internet email as well. But we're going to be restricting all of our initial configuration and mail between a couple of clients on a local LAN. I am using the Linux Academy lab servers for this. Right now I've got a CentOS 7 box spun up, and then we'll also spin up a second box that we'll use for a client when we get to the testing our configuration. So right now we want to add some email aliases, and by default postfix should likely be installed on your system, and you can check that just by doing a ps aux and grepping for postfix. In this case it is absolutely running. You can install it if you do a yum install postfix, and it will install and set itself up after you do a system control enable and start on the service itself. Otherwise, it's handled the exact same way as any systemd service would. So by default, when we send a message to any user on our system, the message is only delivered to that specific user. However, we can create what are called email aliases using any of the existing users on the system. So the first thing that we want to do is we've got the user called user that is set up by default on our Linux Academy servers. We've also got root, but we want to keep root out of this. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a user called user2, and we're just going to set a password for that user2 so that we have a user to work with. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the etc postfix directory, and you're going to see that there's a number of files in the postfix directory, and we're going to continue to work within this directory as we go forward. But for setting up aliases, there would normally be an aliases file, but since that hasn't been set up, that's one of the files that doesn't exist by default, because by default any user message simply goes to that user. There's no need for an aliases file in that case. However, since what we want to do is we want to be able to send a single message to the user account called user, and we want it to be picked up by user and user2. So we can do that very easily by just doing a vim or vi on aliases. It'll create the file for us. And all we're going to do here is we're going to say when we send an email to the user account, user, we're going to send it to user and user2. Now the reason that we have to put in user, because if we only put in user2, because we've created the aliases file, then the system is going to assume that when you send a message to user, you only want to send it to user2 directly, and even if the user called user exists, it's not going to get a copy of that message. So in this case, we want both of them, so we're going to set up both email aliases. Now we can leave it at just the one. We can also add, for example, if we wanted to say anytime a message goes to admin configured here, we want it to go to just user. If we wanted to set up an email alias that says secretary, we could send it to user2. And again, these are addresses that are assumed to be on the system. So we need to make sure that we do an add user admin add user secretary, and then password for admin, and then a password for secretary. And then once we have these accounts created and the user aliases exist, so now we cat out aliases to make sure it's saved everything we have. So anytime we send a user an email to user, it goes to both user and user 2. Anytime we send an email to admin, it goes to user, or secretary, it goes to user 2. Now, because those accounts admin and secretary exist, even though we're sending a message to admin, they're not going, the admin user, if you're logged in as admin and you check your mail, you're not actually going to get an email. Only the user is going to receive this email because we don't have the admin in the list of aliases. So we've effectively redefined those, the admin and secretary user to be user and user 2 from a mail perspective. So if we clear this, then the last thing that we have to run before we go into configuring our SMTP service is we have to run post alias and then the name of the file which we configured for postfix and aliases, and that will allow the postfix system to pick up the fact that the that those aliases now exist, so that when it's answering messages for particular users, that there are aliases that it has to take into account. So for configuring email aliases for SMTP using postfix, that's all there is to it. My name is Terry for Linux Academy.